So we're going to actually start, now that we've got the introduction to how we got to where we are, talk about the web in general. We're going to start with course content right off the bat. And possibly the most important thing in World Wide Web is HTML. I mean, HTML has been similar since the beginning of the web. Obviously, there's more things. HTML5 we'll talk about. There's more content, but HTML really hasn't changed much since those bullets from 1994, 1995. And as I mentioned, HTML is hypertext markup language is what it stands for. It's a markup language like XML that contains of tags, like we saw before the break, that define document content. The tags define the information shared. So in HTML, which is a specific type of XML, the tags create a web page that can be transferred from a server to a client, like we talked about. We also talked about how tag languages can be transferred to attribute data. If you've heard of or used the Google Earth KML, that's another type of XML file. So now we're familiar. XML is the generic content. We've also learned about metadata being stored in XML, Google Earth KML files, the config add-in X file from an Esri desktop add-in, HTML. These are all markup languages. And as I said, tags are defined as keywords in the document. They're surrounded by angle brackets, and they define the area of the HTML text that contains that attribute. So as I said earlier, the tag indicates what's represented, and the content within the tag is the information. The first tag is the start tag, and the end tag is preceded by a /. So in this mock-up XML text, there's an attribute called university that starts with university, ends with /university, and the information in this case is SUNY at Buffalo. There can be subtags beneath university. So here you see there's an attribute department, course, and instructor. So a little review of HTML and XML from before the break. So this is a screenshot of the UB Geography Department website. So we talked about how a browser renders HTML in text, takes the text of HTML and renders it as a web page. So you can kind of see here, we'll spend the rest of tonight and next week too talking about some of these specific things. You can just see before we get into define specific tags how it says home, our department, undergraduate, graduate, people, research. See how research is commented out. We'll talk about that. Contact. We'll see how that translates into the banner on the Geography Department website there. And then in this section of the HTML, we see people, alumni, directory of graduate students, and that corresponds. So we'll spend the next part of the course learning how to build these pages that can render like this. We can use an HTML file is not the most complex thing you can do in Visual Studio. You can do a lot of very involved, complicated applications in Visual Studio, but you can do something as simple as an HTML file in Visual Studio as well. And so to do that, you go to the File menu, and you have Visual Studio on these machines. You go to the Start menu, you'll see Microsoft Visual Studio 2010. This is going to be a little different because I had to plug my laptop in. It's 2012, but the differences will be more cosmetic. You can go to File or File New and then File New File, and you'll see a bunch of different types of files come up. And you might see we go right to HTML page. I click Open. It's going to take a second. And unlike when we set up a add-in, there's a lot of different files get created. This is it. It's all we get to start. I can click Save. I can save it to a location. Ooh. put it in a folder, call it. So I have created an HTML file called May27th.html. We'll talk about what some of these things mean. We'll definitely not get through this all tonight. And here's what it more looks like in 2010, where you choose the type HTML page. There's a lot of types we just don't have the time to get to in this course, but we will talk about style sheets maybe in a few weeks as well. So the screenshot just shows what I've showed you. A default HTML file is created. Click save to save it with your own name and location, like I just did. I went to File, Visual Studio, yeah.
Okay.
File, New File. It's going to look a little different. File, New File. I chose HTML page. And then Open. Yeah, so that's how you. And then you click Save if you want to give it a more meaningful name. So the next slide that I put in the presentation kind of summarizes what we saw from the beginning. These are some basic outlines of an HTML page. It starts out with this doc type tag that defines this as an HTML page, and it refers to www.w3.org, and this, we won't get anything more into this, that basically says that this is going to be an HTML page. So when you send this request, when someone requests the page, your browser knows from this first line that this is an HTML page. We don't need to worry about that more. All text on the page has to start with HTML, be within the HTML tag and the slash HTML tag. What I haven't really shown yet, and this is the first time we've seen this, is a tag can have an attribute within it. Notice instead of just HTML and tag, it has this other attribute, XMLNS. This points to a web address that defines HTML. Notice I wasn't kidding when I said that definition is still referenced from 1999. A lot of the foundations have not changed, even though there's additional functionality. So all additional text, everything else that we talk about in this part of the course, has to be between those two lines. When your browser's reading an HTML page and it gets to this, it says, okay, I'm going to start, HTML starts here and ends here. So anything you want it to interpret has to be within those two tags. Near the top of that, there's a section of the HTML that's the header, and that is defined, it starts with the head tag and ends with /head tag. So in between here goes the page header. The page header does not appear to the user, but contains metadata information. It's important information about the page, but it's not images and text and stuff that the user reads. In our first example, by default, it's just one of the attributes of within the header is the title. So I guess that indirectly does appear to the user. That's what shows up at the top of the web page. And so you would put text in between title and /title, and that would be your browser's. The browser would put that in the title bar. And then any content that you want to appear on the page, images and so on, goes in between body and /body. And there's nothing yet. So when you're in Visual Studio, you can right-click, View in Browser. You don't play, like with a C# solution, we don't play. You right-click, View in Browser, and that will open up Google Chrome. I don't think it'll, in your case it may not, it may be Mozilla or Internet Explorer, some other browser. And notice, this runs, I'm going to do that again. Just to show you, it will, with Visual Studio, it builds, remember I talked about Microsoft IIS and web hosting software? This is just my laptop from work. This doesn't have web hosting software on it. It's not set up to host websites. But yet I want to preview websites on it. So Visual Studio has kind of a built-in test web server for us. So when I first started it, it says ASP.NET Development Server, port 55847. Without getting into the details, Visual Studio emulates a web server with that, so that you can use your own machine to kind of test what this website would look like. And it's pretty boring. Remember, the body was empty, so it's just a blank page. There's nothing there yet. But watch this. I put Greg's first page in the title. Now watch what happens. Notice that. Try that. Notice the Google Chrome tab. Everything in that title tag goes in the tab title. So you'll see the address here. Instead of a web address, you'll see localhost. That means that this web page is being hosted from your own machine. It doesn't say cnn.com or geography.buffalo.edu, it just says localhost. So this is coming from our own machine. And the 55847 is the Windows port that Visual Studio uses to emulate a web server. So next slide just shows us to preview your web page. Right-click anywhere in the HTML and select View in Browser. And that'll open up the browser using this port to see what our page looks like. How do we comment code in an HTML page? And this is the same as C#. Commented areas of code begin with less than, exclamation point, dash dash, and end with dash dash greater than. So again, a comment in code is text that you put in the code to describe it, but it doesn't actually run. So in Visual Studio, I start comments with that special character.
Comment in code is text used to describe what you say.
It's used to describe for the programmer what it has a bunch of different uses. That's the main use.
Okay.
So if I'm on a team and I want the next person that reads this code to know what it does,
Okay.
I can put a comment in that doesn't actually run. Obviously, there's no command that says that.
Yeah.
That's the primary use of commenting. Sometimes a programmer also uses it to remove code that you think is causing a problem. Say your code's not working and you're trying to figure out what's not working, you might remove chunks of code. So if you remove a chunk of code and suddenly it starts working, it was probably that code causing the problem. Obviously, it's very good, and I don't always do this like I should. It's very good to comment as much as possible. Sometimes there's a lot going on sometimes, and I'll even look at my own code later and not remember why I did something. So use it to describe what code does, and especially explain where there's a complicated situation. My first job at UB as a grad student was a bunch of students wrote a very complicated AML. There's another programming thing I learned that's gone. Programming language to model Great Lakes habitat, and graduated and left UB. They needed some updates to it, realized that there was like 10 or 20,000 lines of code and not a single comment, and the professors didn't have the slightest idea what the code did. So they hired us, another team of students, I being one of them, to try to figure out what it did. I think we had to start from scratch. It was so hard. So the comments are a good thing, especially if you're on a team of developers where you're on vacation. Another developer might take over your code while you're gone. Like I said, sometimes I can't even remember what I did, let alone what someone else meant. So that's how, and notice, I don't think I mentioned that, but notice how in Visual Studio it turns green. When you have a commented line, to remind you that it's a comment, Visual Studio turns the text to green. So we'll talk about, we're actually pretty close, not that many slides left. We will start talking about some of the main attributes of HTML, and then we'll stop and pick that up next Monday. As I said, HTML, and this also demonstrates how a tag can have an attribute in it. So tags can have attributes and events. In desktop programming, those that were in 555, we spent quite a bit of time on events. A tag with a hyperlink in HTML also has an event. So for example, it's off the screen here, there's an event called onClick. So you can define a set of code to run when the user clicks the button, for example. An event in programming is the result of some action. So one example here, onClick is usually the event that we talk about. OnAbort is an event. Say the user has started to do something and they hit escape or something to stop. You could have an event defined called onAbort. So you'd say, okay, onAbort, run this script. We'll talk a lot more about that. And tags also have attributes. The A tag, where we define hyperlinks, is a very commonly used tag. We may even get to that tonight. Has an attribute called href. The A tag basically is where you set up a hyperlink on a web page. So a part of your web page hyperlinks to a different web page. Like even, I'm sure I could find something already open. On the page where we buy a HTTPS certificate. See how here it says available SSL certificates, and you've all used the internet, you know what's going to happen. You click on it and goes to another page. That's managed with an A tag. In Facebook, if I click J.K. Rowling, it goes to another page on Facebook. That's a hyperlink. That's managed in HTML with this A tag. And there's a very important attribute to the A tag, this href, that as you might guess tells it where it goes. So that href tells me what new page to open. So that's a specific thing that we're learning now. But even more generically is these attributes within tags are very important. Some attributes and events are shared by many different tags. In other words, many different tags you might see the same attribute occurring over and over. Other attributes might be specific to only one type of tag. These are some attributes that appear in many different tags. Class and style, we'll talk about later. They're related to cascading style sheets. I will stop there because we'll spend a class talking about that. But just to introduce that, style sheets let you define how the page looks in terms of what font is used, colors, and so on. Most tags have an ID attribute. This is just like in C# in desktop add-ins when you define variables. You can define your tag with a unique ID so that if you use that tag in JavaScript, the ID is how you reference that tag in your JavaScript code. So if I go to So this is the HTML on the department website. So this header, department officers, right, that which defines that text here, defines the leadership of the department. That header tag has an ID of title _0. So if I write JavaScript code, which which we will do, and I want to reference that tag, I would reference it with title _0. It's just like in C# defining a variable and using it later. So you'll see the ID tag in use quite a bit. Along the same point, many tags also have an attribute title. Some events are often shared by many tags and seen regularly. And as I mentioned earlier, an event, like in desktop programming, an event defines a set of code that runs when your user does something on the page. And almost every tag has an on-click event. So on-click equals, and then you define a script name. Conceivably, then you would write a JavaScript function with that same name. We'll do that a lot here. So when the user clicks that tag, this script that you've defined will run at the time when that occurs. Well, they don't have that.
So events are like the action of the attribute?
Exactly. That's exactly. It's the action that occurs. So like I click, this is the Buffalo radar. It looked like it was quieter. More storms are coming. But I can click this arrow. Clicking that triggers an action or an on-click event, and that particular button brings me to the Binghamton radar. That's an on-click. Now I see State College, Pennsylvania radar. Just about every tag has an on-click event. But it's on you. It's your responsibility. If you define an on-click attribute in the tag, you then have to write a script to tell it to do something. Similar to that, many events have an on-DVL click. That's if the user double clicks on it. You can actually have something different happen if the user double clicks. On mouse down is a type of event if the user holds the mouse button down. And in a text box, you can have an on key press event. So if there's a text box, so we'll go over all the different controls on a web page next week. If a user types a letter in a text box, you can use an on key press event to see what letter they typed and have some sort of have an action. The first lab, for those that were in the desktop course, the first lab was building a calculator. In this course, we'll do the very same thing for first lab, only on an HTML page. You'll build an HTML page that's a web calculator, a web version of what those of you in the desktop class did using Windows. But my point in mentioning that is you can do an on key press event. I hope I still have that in the lab. On a numeric text box. Say you want only numbers in a text box. You can use on key press to evaluate whether a number was pressed. And say it wasn't, you could reject that letter. Say someone types the letter G in the text box for a number to convert, you can reject the letter. Any questions so far? I mentioned this earlier, body is a top level attribute that contains everything visible on the page. Any renderable tags, in other words, any tag that helps us draw things on the web page has to be within body. Notice here the comment in green. So here, and I'll do this, I've added a link tag, or an A, to my body. I actually should have put that within body, this is wrong. Hrefs should be before /body. So in our very preliminary development here, I've written one line to my code, an A tag with an href to this web address, and I put text in and then ended it with /A. If I go to view browser, notice now it's not just a white screen anymore. I get this link, and if I click on it, what I should have done is, because it's not local, this. That will work better.
And why did you end it with /A?
The /A tells, it's a good question. That tells the browser that this A tag is finished.
Okay.
So you need to close the tag. So now if I click that, notice the A tag is going to bring me to the geography page. Another top-level HTML attribute is a div tag. Div itself has no specific meaning, but it's used as a placeholder for dynamic content. So that's something a little newer that's come along with HTML. So I have and you'll use this with the ESRI ArcGIS server JavaScript API. We'll use div tags a lot. I've defined a div tag. I've called it map legend, and I put nothing in it initially. I can use JavaScript later that references the div tag with that ID and writes in content later. So that's what a div tag is used for. I won't get into that too much more now because we'll do that a lot in the second half of the course. So I said HTML is the root element containing all other elements on the page. It's the very first thing after doc type. So all these other things we talk about will be within HTML and /HTML. Another top-level HTML attribute that we'll see is called link. Link provides a reference to a resource external to the page. So I said the most common use, and this is how we'll use it, is to link to a style sheet. And these style sheets are these things that define how the page looks. So here's the link tag. There's a rel attribute. In this case, we define it as a style sheet. Its type is text/CSS. That tells the browser that the link is to a CSS file, a cascading style sheet. And then the href tells me the web address of that cascading style sheet. So this example links to a style sheet that ESRI maintains. ESRI has a lot of content available on this js.arcgis.com URL. So now when we add this link, we can use style sheets from this ESRI website. Again, we'll do this more later. We have meta tags also occur within the header on the HTML tag. They don't have anything to do with content. They are mostly used by search engines to help define what the page is. This was the example I got this meta tag from the Wegmans website. So on the Wegmans website, it has a title, and then they added a description of the page. So when Google builds their search engine content every day, Google uses the information in the meta tags to try and help define what a page is. So if you go into Google, say I'm interested in visiting China. Obviously you type visiting China into Google, it comes up with some results. If I go to 10 best cities, that looks cool, to visit in China, why did that page come up? Notice Google uses this content to help build that search. This content says China top cities, Beijing, Shanghai, 10 best cities are introduced. So Google uses the meta. There are whole companies that are devoted just to helping people appear on search engines. There's a company in Buffalo called Local Edge, where they have a whole department of people that do nothing more than help build the meta tags. It's a lot of money if you think about it. If this, I didn't look that carefully. If this, and I'm not sure if it does or not, this company might, sell tours to China. They do, like Yangtze River cruises and so on. So having I mean, if someone types visiting China, having their website show up first is a pretty big deal financially. Many people, when they use the internet, just go to the very first link. So that can be worth a lot of money, and some companies will pay a lot of money to have those meta tags refined just so. The style top-level tag is similar to CSS. You can set style, and again, CSS and style are used to define, fonts, colors, things like that. We saw how the link can reference an external style sheet. With a style tag, you can define the style of your tag right there without having to reference the style sheet. And we'll save that topic for further discussion in a bit. I already showed you this, but the title tag lets us define what title appears on the browser. So in other words, here, this is an ESRI website. They've defined that as their title, so it shows up here. We're almost done. An important one, and I guess we already looked at this, is the A tag. If you were wondering why it's A, text content on HTML page, A stands for anchor. It's better known as the hyperlink tag, but if you ever wonder what A stands for, now you know it's the anchor. It allows users to click on a page and link to additional content, usually a different page. Some of the key attributes to anchor: href, target location. You saw me do this a moment ago. This is I don't remember where I got this from, but here's a list of links. So you see A, href, and that links to the website. So when you click on this tag, that tells you what website it goes to. Target equals blank, underscore blank, see that additional attribute? That tells it to open in a new page. So remember when I did view in browser, I click and it just the map just, or the page just opens up. If I also add the attribute target equals blank, and there's a bunch of different things here. Notice also, people that have used Visual Studio before will be used to this, but Visual Studio has something called target or autocomplete. So when I hit target equals, it already knows what I might put, and I can just pick that. So notice now with target equals blank, watch the slightly different thing that occurs. When I click on this link, it kept my original page and opened up the website in a new page. Very often that might be preferable. Well, that's the last slide. I wanted to, before we go, just mention, I don't think I did, I had it open here, is that content will be managed on UB Learns. So you all now should have access to UB Learns. So right now UB Learns has the syllabus. I'll also upload every PowerPoint presentation. I try to stay ahead. That way, I mean, sometimes I have to miss class, and sometimes, I know we all want to be here every day, but other stuff happens and you might not be able to make it. All of the PowerPoints, I will try early on in the course to get all of the PowerPoints listed early. I know some people like to look ahead, so I will have that up. I don't want to say shortly, maybe by next week I'll have all of the slides shows up here along with the syllabus. I will also load the labs. I don't set, I guess I didn't cover that. I know I try to be flexible. It's a little bit less so now. The semesters are rough, spring and fall semester, where everyone has a lot going on. Maybe that's a little less for you now in the summer. What I'm getting at is I don't set specific due dates. It's just have everything done by the end of the semester. The more you can submit early, the better. That helps me not have a deluge of stuff at the end of the semester, and it helps you not get behind. But I try to be flexible. I know everyone, life gets in the way and you have other things going on. So there aren't set due dates to the labs, but I would still encourage you to work through them as the course goes on. So the PowerPoint presentations and the labs will be on UV Learns as the course progresses. Next thing in 5 weeks it'll be over. But I'll put everything up here as soon as I can, including looking ahead for those of you that might want to sneak peek ahead, or you may know that there might be a night where you are unable to make it. That way you can kind of look at what content is being talked about. And with that, we will end, and we'll pick this up next Monday.